Hey guys, today I wanted to show you a recent video game music track that I wrote for a demo for a new game. And this one is in the style of Mega Man X, one of my favorite video game series of all time, specifically the Super Nintendo ones. Because that 16-bit synthy goodness, I absolutely love the melodies of that series, the really interesting harmonies, and the thumping, driving bass lines, the kick drums, and the kind of the EDM style that everything is based in. It's kind of a blend of EDM and rock. So I absolutely love that series, and I love anytime I get a chance to write for like a blaster style game that's very action packed, because the music's got to be really in your face and really interesting, and in this case very technological. So I want to show you behind the scenes of my Cubase session and some of the choices I made. And a fun note is this entire thing consists of Massive and Absynth from Native Instruments. The only instrument that doesn't is a piano sample from Keyscape. So let's dive in, let's take a look. So the first thing you'll notice is the entire track is a loop. It's at the 1 minute and 14 second length, and it's pretty straightforward. It's kind of an A section and a B section with a little intro at the beginning. So right at the top, you'll notice if I solo the synth bass that I have going on, it's one of the most interesting parts, I think, actually. Because right off the top, even though this is a 4/4 time, it's at 148 beats per minute. Right off the bat, I wanted to create a ton of energy. And the way that I did that is I created syncopation. So that just means you're choosing beats, choosing to put your notes off the beat. So right off the bat, you'll notice that it's one and it's the if you're doing 16th notes of the beat 2, it's the and of beat 3, and the 4E, so the E, the second of the 4 16th notes of the 4th beat. So that's why it's bum 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 bum, and it has that syncopation going on. It automatically creates tension from the very first measure. And a very specific note about this synth bass. If I pull open my EQ, I love to use Fab Filter, Pro Q, and I've been preaching this a lot lately, this idea of taking a high pass and a low pass filter and really honing in on a very specific frequency. That way you don't lose any headroom and everything is very specific to that frequency range. So right here between about 30 and 400 is where I have my bass living. It's right there in that range. It's very low frequency. So it's just high enough to where you'll hear it on like an iPhone speaker, but also low enough that if you have a sub, it's going to be really juicy and really fat. But in order to create even more energy, I created a second synth bass. And this one, also with Massive, if you're interested in seeing that patch here, pretty simple. Just went to my browser, chose a synth bass, and then played around with some of the knobs here. And I love to have chorus on just about everything I do within this style, because it's kind of the uniqueness of the Mega Man sound. There's a lot of chorus, very 80s rock kind of feel. And so in this bass, I chose to take that EQ and to automate it. Very easy to do. If you're in Cubase, just hit this little W button for write automation, and you move your knobs however you want, and it'll actually record that automation. So check out what I did with this. You can kind of see how it expands throughout. So here's what it actually sounds like. It's a secondary bass line on top of it that intentionally starts off low frequency, but as I go, it gets higher and higher and higher. That way it kind of sucks us into what will become the actual melody section. So here's what it sounds like together. That's all there is to it. But it creates such energy, and it really gets you interested in this entire track. And then later I also have a third synth bass to really get this thing driving. I call this a galloping bass, and some people might just create an LFO or an arpeggiator to do this, but I like to do everything manually so that I have a lot of control. So I literally went over to my keyboard. I'm a pianist, so that's what I do. But here's what it sounds like. That's what I did. I just went through and I chose chords that I thought made sense. And because in this type of music, you want to have kind of a heroic feel. It's not dark music. It's supposed to be uplifting, like you want it to be energizing, because we have this hero going through blasting stuff and trying to save the day. So the chords I chose was to use major chords. But to do it in a way that it's constantly moving, and it has this chromatic mediant, which means a sharp major third scale degree away. It's not in the same scale. And that way, it can kind of have this really heroic style. So of course you got to have a melody for that to live on. And so for the melody, I just took some synth brass sounds, and again, I could preach this all day, but the idea is whenever you're choosing where your frequency is going to live, melodies usually need to be in the mid or the high. There's no point in putting it in the bass information, so that's why I sweep it off. And a little note here, Super Mega Man style is when you take a pitch bend wheel and you scoop down at the ends of phrases. That way nothing is ever stagnant. Cool. And then in this second half of the A section, I decided, okay, we have this really bright sound. Let's now make it feel even more intense, because I totally just modulated. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the melody information with a little harmony counter with it. And all I'm doing is I'm constantly rising the melody. It has this heroic feel to it. So in order to make it feel even more, grandeur, to make it feel bigger, I then added a synth brass. And so for that, he added in exact same notes, 1 octave lower. See, lots of pitch bends. And then this part, notice how I offset the beats. So it's every 3/8 notes. Which just, again, it kind of plays with your expectations. And then we keep going. So even right there, the melody, I intentionally left a space because we're expecting something right there on beat 1. Because it's kind of, it's not cliche, but it's by this point in the melody within an 8-bar phrase, we're kind of expecting to land on a 1 chord to kind of get back to that minor 1. So by leaving a space and then scooping into it, just creates this anticipation. And then I just go straight into a B section. I don't even let you feel any sense of repeat information, of familiarities. I just go straight into something new. And that's why in this next section, I grab another synth. It's why the bass is now kind of pumping. It's not on the beat anymore. Pretty simple chords, just a bunch of 1s and 4s and 5s, but the melody is what really makes it, because it's kind of a galloping melody. Also very Mega Man style of when you take, your melody is never really on the beat. It's constantly dodging the beats. That melody there, I threw a stereo delay on. Let me grab it. It's just an 8th note, 50% right. So every time it hits, da-da-da-da-da-da, kind of has that galloping feel already, but then I did a lot of syncopation with it, and I also chose to do a lot of vibrato with my mod wheel. That way at the ends of phrase, da-da-ba, instead of ba-da-ba, it just gives it more musicality. But then on top of that, I also put a lot of scooping notes. They're called appoggiaturas in sheet music, classical music. I'm just, instead of going ba 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 bum, which you could do, I went bum ba da dum bum run da dum da rian dum dum. I'm just adding all these extra little riffs like that. You don't have to have it, but it just adds more flavor. And I just kind of kept going with that idea. But then just like before, in order to kind of flesh this out, make it feel bigger, I then added in the synth brass, and I even doubled the melody an octave higher with another synth. But because these are very EQ'd out, it's now mid-range plus high range, so it just kind of gives it this really fat, juicy feeling. Also worth noting that the synth brass is very deliberately following the rhythm of the bass line, but now they're thicker chords. I like that. And then I end the whole thing. Instead of just ending on, I guess, a minor 1, harmonically, I chose to keep raising the melody until we hit a 5 chord, a dominant chord that leads right back to the minor 1 that we start everything off with. It's kind of something that I do in a lot of my writing. Maybe it's my signature sound, I don't know, but I just really like that style because it plays with your expectations and it just creates a really cool loop point. And I also decided, instead of like stopping right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, I did want to add something that helps tie in the loop. And so over here in my bass line, I just did a little 3-note, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. That way it goes straight back. It's just a little arpeggio. Gets us right back into that initial little riff. Now, without any percussion, this doesn't have a lot of life to it, but that's kind of the meat. That's what I had to work with. And then I wanted to start beefing it up. So then I started adding hi-hats and kicks. And so that's super important. So my kick, whenever I do kicks, I always have super EQ'd out. It's a very low thud and it should match your bass line. And that really gives life to this whole thing. And that's a 4 on the floor kick, classic club style. You hear that throughout the entire track, except for right once we get to the this little gap here. I intentionally put a gap. That way it plays with our expectations. You could call it a fall or a rise, whatever. So it just plays with your expectations, which gives you all the room in the world to put something interesting, something else. I also did a hi-hat, and my hi-hat is actually, it's super EQ'd out as well, but it's just a stereo delay. I chose a very thin hi-hat for this, and for those curious, that's just an absynth instrument. So everything's digital. Nothing here is analog. Straight from Absynth and Massive. So I just chose a little hi-hat, a closed hi-hat that's very small, that I try to put on the offbeats. So it's actually just a 2-bar pattern, but I don't believe in doing a 1-bar pattern that just repeats forever. That's really boring. I like to add some extra motion on the 2nd bar. There it is. Keeps it interesting, because the way that I feel is in music, you gotta change something every 2 bars. It doesn't matter what it is, but something sonically has to change. And so if my percussion is already changing every 2 bars, it just gives more room and more space for like my bass to change, my other instruments. And then the last 2 elements here, gotta have this if you're gonna do a Mega Man style. You gotta have some orchestral hits. Now these are just like the classic Roland orchestral hits you hear and everything from the 80s and 90s. So I had to put these in here. So, and I put them right at the space, right in the gap between the percussion. Here's what it sounds like. Isn't that great? I did it again right here in this gap. But you gotta admit, it feels like something's missing still in the high range. It's nice, but it's missing something. So I decided to add some low piano hits and some high piano hits. Now, we've already used up all of our low and mid information. So a piano traditionally is a low and mid-range instrument. So that soft, warm sound will not work in this context. So what I did is I had to actually take a low-ended piano, low notes, but then I only used the high range. And I put a stereo delay on it. And then it sounds like this. It sounds really cool. It's super cool. And then for the high, piano. I just use a different patch because there's no point. The previous one wouldn't work in this context. That cool low piano doesn't work in this really full context. So I had to do a different piano. And now it's actually a mid-range piano, EQ, but high notes. So check this out. Now we have some real energy. I just do that for basically the rest. And then the B section, you've already heard that. So let's hear what this entire soundtrack sounds like, this entire track, from start to finish with a little bit of loop. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy.